Morning. Our first panel will focus on glass ceilings and their effects on gender equality in public administration. We will start by defining glass ceilings and parity, introducing the dimensions of gender-inclusive decision-making, and explaining their importance for effective public administration. Second, we consider the complexities of measuring decision-making levels across diverse public administrations. Third, we present key findings on women's inclusion in public sector decision-making positions globally and by region, and we showcase examples of progress over time. We conclude by highlighting key mechanisms for increasing women's participation in public sector leadership. While glass ceilings is a commonplace term, we still take a moment to clarify our definition, which is the actual or perceived barriers that block women from moving up the ranks of an organization, depressing their representation in senior management and top executive roles. Parity, equal numbers of women and men employed and leading in public administration, is an important indicator of progress on gender equality. We measure parity at between 45% and 55% women or men.
In our research, we also use the terminology of gender-inclusive decision-making, which includes at least 3 dimensions. First, it takes into account women's descriptive representation, which is the proportional presence of women from diverse backgrounds in decision-making positions. Second, gender-inclusive decision-making requires that we collect, analyze, and respond to data using a gender-sensitive approach. And third, it involves substantive representation, which ensures that decisions are inclusive of both men's and women's interests and priorities, considering decision-making behaviors, processes, and outcomes. In this figure, we highlight the first of the 3 dimensions because women's descriptive representation is the focus of much of our data and analysis. Why does gender-inclusive decision-making in public administration matter? We highlight 4 reasons. First, it asserts women's human rights, specifically their right to participate in public life as guaranteed by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and CEDAW. Second, women's presence in visible decision-making positions has a symbolic effect, as it sends the message to both public and private workplaces that women can and should lead. Third, leadership comes with discretionary power in how policies are formulated or interpreted. Including women in leadership and management enhances service delivery to women and encourages the engagement of women citizens in government programs. Fourth, gender parity improves the quality of decision-making. When women are brought into the fold, this doubles the pool of talent and increases the diversity of ideas, values, priorities, and political styles that shape policy outcomes.
As the previous discussion suggests, measuring decision-making levels across diverse public administrations is complex. Looking across existing research, there is no agreed-upon way to measure decision-making. To date, most attempts to measure women's share of decision-making positions across countries takes one of 2 approaches. One is to define what is meant by decision-making and then find the data that most closely fits the definition. The other is to report whatever decision-making data are available, often aggregating different types of data broadly into one single decision-making category. Our research takes a new approach by using available decision-making data and matching them to one of the 3 categories: top leaders, senior managers, and managers. Top leaders are the small amount of number of executive positions at the very top level of public administration, typically less than 1% of a country's public servants. Top leaders include positions such as permanent secretary and agency director. Senior managers generally capture a slightly larger share of leadership positions, averaging around 3% of public administration positions. Managers are the broadest category of decision-making used in this report and comprise 13% of positions on average.
Turning now to our findings, these rings present the average share of women and men across levels in public administration worldwide. Shown in the first ring on the left, women average 46% of public administrators. However, when we look at the three levels of decision-making presented next, managers, senior managers, and top leaders, gender gaps are wider. Women comprise only 38% of managers, 30% of senior managers, and 31% of top leaders. We see some evidence of a well-known pattern in organizations. At higher rungs of the hierarchy, women's share of positions diminishes. We found it to be curious, however, that top leaders and senior managers average around the same share of women. One possible explanation is that regions with high levels of women top leaders are more likely to report these statistics. Another possible explanation is the top-down efforts by leaders to diversify public administration leadership. Many top leaders are appointed by elected politicians, who can be subject to pressure to include more women. Now, these two heat maps side by side show first, substantial variation in women in decision-making positions across countries, and secondly, across ranks. Top leaders are shown in the map on the left, and managers are shown on the right. Women's underrepresentation appears in shades of gray. Gender parity is in light purple, and women hold 55% or more positions in countries shaded dark purple. We find that women's share of top leaders ranges from a low of 4% in Japan and Nepal to a high of 58% in Liechtenstein and Poland. Of the 78 countries with available data, only 14% have reached gender parity or have a majority of women in top leadership positions. And of these, all but one, New Zealand, are in Europe or North America. Now, among managers, women's levels of participation are slightly better. Japan at 5% and Republic of Korea at 13% are on the lower end, whereas Lithuania and Malaysia lead the world in women managers with 68% and 66% respectively. 27% of countries are at the threshold for gender parity or a majority of women in management.
Next, we summarize women's share of decision-making position by region, but we also bring another position into the mix, cabinet positions. These are the political posts that sit at the top of the executive branch. Women's share of cabinet positions in each region appears in blue, followed by top leaders in orange, senior managers in red, and managers in purple. Regions are sorted by women's share of cabinet positions from lowest at the bottom and top of the figure to highest at the bottom. Interestingly, looking across the regions, we find first that women's share of cabinet positions is almost always lower than their share of decision-making positions in public administration. Overall, this pattern suggests once again that as the power and prestige of decision-making positions increase, women's representation tends to decline. A second finding is that the regional variation in women's share of cabinet positions aligns with that in decision-making in public administration. The region at the top, Northern Africa and Western Asia, has the lowest levels of women in decision-making across nearly all measures. In contrast, Europe and North America, together with Latin America and the Caribbean, perform well relative to other regions on most categories of decision-making. This suggests the context-specific factors that create regional differences in women's cabinet representation have similar effects on top leaders, senior managers, and managers. Despite these persistent gender gaps in decision-making positions in public administration, some countries are showing evidence of progress over time. In Europe, where there is high-quality data on top leaders over time, women's share of top administrative positions increased from 32% to 42% in the decade between 2010 and 2020. There are other standout examples. In 2019, Statistics Mauritius reported 39% of women were in senior positions in government services, an increase from 19% over 2 decades. And in Sri Lanka, women in decision-making positions went from 28% in 2006 to just shy of 40% in 2016.
Although there are many challenges that limit women's advancement into decision-making positions in public administration, we focus here on 2 institutional barriers. One barrier is workplace culture, which associates effective leadership with masculine traits. This places women in a double bind. If they do not act like men, they may be seen as poor leaders. But if they do display stereotypical masculine behavior, they may face criticism for not being feminine enough. In Georgia, where women are 36% of high-ranking civil servants, surveys of civil servants demonstrate the limiting effects of workplace culture. Women in leadership perceive more criticism and less respect from their supervisors than men in similar positions. Another barrier is recruitment, retention, and promotion policies. Though they may be gender neutral on paper, in practice, these policies lack gender sensitivity and do not account for the life circumstances that limit women's career advancement. Faced with these challenges, it is important to consider opportunities for making positive change. Here we highlight 2. One approach that governments can take is to adopt gender quotas, which are policies that require a certain number or percentage of women to be placed into a position or level. Research demonstrates that electoral gender quotas have been effective at advancing gender parity in political leadership. We know much less about the effectiveness of gender quotas in public administration. Still, a handful of country cases that have been studied, including Colombia, France, and Malaysia, demonstrate their potential. The 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda presents a second opportunity to improve the availability and quality of statistics on women in decision-making positions. SDG Indicator 1671B now requires countries to collect and report statistics on women in the public service. This will standardize reporting of sex disaggregated decision-making data through a set of occupational categories. Thank you so much for listening, and we look forward to your discussion.
So I will now invite our 2 panelists to offer their comments. To save time, we won't be listing all of their qualifications and accomplishments of these distinguished discussants, but we do encourage all of you to look to our website, girl.pitt.edu, where we have posted the biographies of all of the workshop participants. However, I will briefly introduce these our distinguished discussants as we will do in future panels. So first, Dr. Maria J. D'Agostino is Professor of Public Administration in the Department of Public Management at John Jay College of Criminal Justice at the City University of New York, where she also co-leads the Initiative for Gender Equity in the Public Sector. Dr. D'Agostino is one of the leading experts on gender equality in public administration across countries. Second, we'll hear from Jose Cruz Osorio, who's manager of UNDP's Panama Regional Hub and the Regional Bureau for Latin America and the Caribbean. We're grateful to Jose as one of the UNDP leaders who's long championed our unique collaboration. Each of our commentators will have 10 minutes, and then we'll bring back the Gepa working group to respond and answer attendees' questions with any remaining time. So please do use the Q&A function to ask any questions that you might have on our first panel topic. So with that, I will turn it over to Dr. D'Agostino. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction, and good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world today. I just want to take a moment to really thank and say what a great presentation the students did. That was just excellent work. It was great to see you all presenting. And it's always exciting to be part of a discussion on research and public administration and gender equity. It certainly matters, and the data and research in this area is lacking. And as the report highlights, right, we tend to focus on the elected officials and not the public administrators. So this is such important research. The glass ceiling in the public sector is a well-documented problem, right? And as the report highlights, the public sector is the largest employer of women, more than the private sector. So it's critical that the public sector take the lead and set the example. However, as reported, although women represent 46% of the public sector workforce as compared to the private sector, 33%, they are not the majority decision makers. So the question of why and evidence to illustrate the problem is critical, and there's still quite a bit of work to do and research remaining, especially in terms of addressing the glass ceiling. You know, as the findings in the report indicate, the bias, the stereotypes that contribute to the glass ceiling are well rooted in our organizations and reflected in our policies and practices. So, for example, an organization, you know, might have a parental leave policy, but that doesn't mean it's not biased. And the policy might actually be more harmful than beneficial. And it's this taken for grantedness or the assumed gender neutrality of language that we need to be critical about. You know, and in fact, the research has established evidence supporting that it's organizations that are gendered, right? And not simply or not only individuals. And shifting to use this language, as we see in this report, is important to creating a gender inclusive public administration. The findings in the report also indicate the issue of parity and gender inclusiveness is deeply rooted in policies and practices of the workplace and reflects societal norms in terms of women's roles and women's work and men's roles and men's work that is learned and reinforced at home and early education. So solving the problem will take continuous resources and commitment from all levels of government and civil society. And again, that's why it's important and really great to see this collaboration with the University of Pittsburgh and Gepa. So together, they're continuing to collect much necessary data and conduct research for this purpose. The findings also recommend the need for training for training and education as key to addressing challenges related to the glass ceiling. And these are absolutely imperative. However, we also have evidence supporting that it's not sufficient and we need to go beyond this in order to move forward and address the complexity of the problem. And one of the innovative solutions suggested in the report are the quotas, right? The temporary special measures, which I definitely think are worth exploring and gathering more data on and conducting more research about. But we also have to think about getting women into these positions, into these key decision-making positions, is just as important as supporting women when they get there. And not only, support them with resources in terms of training and mentoring, but support leaders that may not fit the stereotypical image that we have grown to associate with successful leaders as men, right? So that's the typical masculine traits and images of leaders, that include that they're competent, ambitious, and decisive. Whereas successful women leaders are not associated with these traits, and when they are often considered negatively. So supporting women leaders, women in these executive decision-making roles requires a cultural shift. Otherwise, we end up placing women like on the glass cliff, right? So that is in situations where they're not set up to be successful, right? Promoting a woman makes an organization look good and perhaps even seems as if the glass ceiling is breaking. But in reality, oftentimes women in these positions may be at high risk of failure without the support and without the organizational shift. They end up being put on this glass cliff. And this will also contribute to the idea that women are not good leaders, right? By others and by women themselves, and they might take themselves out of the running for these positions because they think they won't be successful. So it will be interesting to see this research also consider the glass cliff, especially within the context of quotas. I think that would be interesting and helpful in terms of getting beyond the glass cliff. Another potential way of moving this research forward is to continue to understand the challenges and obstacles, but also consider what are some interventions that could be developed for practice beyond creating policy. Not that policy is not important, absolutely, but creating interventions that can shift the culture and perhaps be catalytic in this area. And one idea that comes to mind when I think about this is digital storytelling, for example, a qualitative method that's often used in the public health realm, and taps into the empathetic nature of individuals and lets you, walk in the shoes of the others, and perhaps can contribute to shifting culture and also re-examining, reconsidering existing policy. And then, just as a final comment, I think gender inclusiveness, can't be achieved without the inclusion of women. But we know that today, that gender is a social construct and it's not binary, but exists more along the spectrum. And perhaps in future reports, it would be helpful to see moving away from just only the binary language. It might be helpful for communities in need. And I think it's important for public administration to take the lead in modeling these practices and language to create a gender inclusive PA. So thanks again for including me part of this conversation.
Thank you so much, Dr. Diaz-Espino. We're so grateful for those really helpful and insightful comments, and certainly are fruitful for helping us to think about our next steps. I took lots of notes, and I hope you'll send us your comments as well. So next we'll be hearing from Jose Cruz Osorio. So I will turn the floor over to you.
Thank you, Melanie. I have to say that I am so happy to be here and see how far all of this alliance and partnership has come from the very early start of those 7 years ago when we sat down to discuss the possibilities. And I don't think we could have dreamt then the type of scale and impact that this partnership has really brought about. But let me simply, I'm very impressed with the results that are presented by all of the students. And I have, it makes me, my career has focused a lot on big scale government reform, public administration change. And I've been doing this for quite a long time that over the last, I would say, 2 decades, there has been a big questioning about the role of the public sector in really driving forward, I think, the big aspirations of a better society and also of just economic and also environmental sustainability. And what is very dramatic, especially with the pandemic, is that I think now more than ever, there's a bigger recognition and appreciation across all the ideological spectrum about the role that the public sector has to play in really finding the solutions, not only for building back better, but for, I think, just the health of both of our planet and our future generations. And which then comes back about, all of the principles that I think were highlighted by in the opening sessions by the provost, by the dean, by Gulden, and by Raquel, about why it's so important, significant to really have this data and be able to have that evidence to really begin to do the type of proposals and recommendations that were outlined by the students. That's a very significant thing. And because even when we started the discussions very early on, when we started this partnership with the University of Pittsburgh, we were very much at the level of statements, of anecdotes of what we would see, what we would hear about, just the importance of really having the hard data and evidence to really back up a lot of this analysis that was conducted more ad hoc. And it's very interesting to see that, to to now, when, for example, we have heat maps, that actually gives us the breakdown, the global regional comparisons across different categories of what we even understand as decision-making levels. I mean, it's just dramatic, the shift that has taken place. Not only that, but of even having, within the 2030 agenda, a very specific targeted indicator where we are now can track, that we are delivering on the promise of greater gender equality and parity in public institutions. That shift alone, to me, is just mind-blowing, and that's why what I want to applaud is this UPIT and UNDP partnership, because it really goes to the heart of transformative change. I've always wondered what is it to I'm fascinated by history, and I always wonder, historical periods where the agents of change that really brought about some of the big shifts in social policy. What was it like? How did that process evolve? How did it change? And I have to say that all of you, the students are really at the heart of this transformative change through this data and analysis that you are conducting for something highly significant that really will shape the future, I think, of the world. So I want to take time to really recognize of how significant it is. Now, Dr. Agostino, I think, has done a great analysis, of some of the issues and the impact that all of this has and how we think about moving forward in terms of the research agenda. And so I think that it does point that we as we progress, that we are able to take all of this and actually make it a reality, that we actually improve on the gender parity numbers of the public administration. One of the very clear messages that I take from the chapter on glass ceilings is that that we do need to address directly some of the barriers that are emerging, that we must be able to now tackle it based on the evidence that we have collected. And this, in a way, within UNDP, we have been supporting governments, especially in the Latin America region, in really taking the aspirations of a lot of the political platforms that are presented into actual impact and results. And this is part and practice of the work of the public administration and of the bureaucracy of how you take an idea and eventually to a very concrete result that impacts the lives of citizens. And it does make me think that what is being generated is that it does gives us all the elements to actually tackle it I think at the two big levels that come very clearly from the report and the data, and that's the cultural shift, but also the parity numbers, and that there are elements on both ends that I think that we need to now if we are committed to really bringing about that parity, that we can actually through this data and analysis, we actually can pinpoint on some of those issues and ideas that then can go through that process of how that policy then is turned into a very tangible result. So more than anything, I think that it's and I see this as the two big pillars: the cultural shift, And Dr. Agostino, I think, enumerated some of those elements, but also the ultimately that we are we want to see big improvements in those numbers. I think that to me it's remarkable that those numbers that we have 46%, 38%, 30%, 31%, it is still very low. And we do need to get to 50, and then that means that we can now start actually making very concrete, not only recommendations, but actually that the political leadership can actually take that commitment to be able to reach and realize that transformation. I think that more than anything, also in the future, what I see is that we are able to drill down into these two big pillars, and actually be able to do more research, more analysis on some of those elements, so that we can actually, not only I think create the evidence, but also push the commitment. To be able to achieve this type of change and transformation. And let me just simply say that the other big element here is the alliance among many players and actors. I speak of UNDP, but UNDP obviously also is a very large organizations. And so, we have the gender team, the governance team, the Oslo Governance Center that have been, have pulled remarkable resources and know-how to be able to then partner with UPID, that in itself, again, also brings a lot of elements to be able to really achieve what has been done through this global report. But at the end of it all, it's I think people like Melanie and Muge and on my side, who were my team members at that time, who was Chiara Lee and Pelle Lutgen, who will also be panelists and discussants in later panels. It is a passion that really I applaud, because it's a commitment that I think that we are seeing, that when that passion is really harnessed and mobilized, and I know that the students are equally, share that passion to be, because I've seen them at work and as part of Girl, that you really we are at the cusp of that big historical transformation. So again, just really applaud, and I hope that we continue to see even greater progress on this data. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Jose. So great to have you back with us, and we just are so excited every time we're able to show the breadth and depth of the UNDP and Girl collaboration, and you're such a great example of that, so thank you. So we have just a few minutes left in this panel, so we're scheduled to go to 11:15 and then take a 10-minute break. The whole workshop's 3.5 hours, so we're trying to build in at least a few short breaks for folks. So as the moderator, I will take liberty of just responding to a few of the comments and questions that have come in, and then I will turn it back to the students to have the last word if they so choose. So from my perspective, I really value the sort of other concepts related to glass that have come up in the discussion today and in the comments and the questions. So we're presenting on glass ceilings and glass walls as our first two panels. But as Dr. D'Agostino says, there's also the glass cliffs, right, where we know when women go into leadership, they are at risk of being put into positions that are precarious. and that it is so important to think beyond the numbers to ways that we can build inclusive institutions and support cultures that enable women to be successful in those positions. And we had a question as well from Nora Anter, who is an academic in Sweden, who's also using the concept of glass escalators. So we know this is a concept that was originally designed to understand how even in organizations that tend to be dominated numerically by women, we tend to see men make up the majority of positions of leadership. And the idea is even in these feminized fields, sort of men have a glass escalator that helps them come up. So I think for me, the idea of glass escalators is in fact really useful as well in the public administration context, but I think we would have more to say about it if we had good data that was both at the about leaders, but also broken down by ministries or sectors. So we know, and as we'll discuss in the next panel, that some sectors tend to be more feminized than others. And so we would expect that in some of those feminized sectors, it may be that women have a better chance of getting into leadership, but it is just unfortunate that so far few countries make available the kinds of data that would allow us to look at that. So I think it's great that studies like yours, Nora, and Sweden are looking at a single country to evaluate these mechanisms, because it's something we don't necessarily have the data to do well on the global level yet, although we do hope that countries will continue to improve the availability of data that are broken down both by sector and level. And then the other thing I wanted to say is simply that, you know, both of our commentators pointed to culture. And, you know, I think when we had originally thought about embarking on this report, our hope was, you know, to build in case studies, which was something they did in the first report in 2014. And if you haven't checked out that report, I encourage you to go take a look, because in addition to the overall overarching perspective, they have detailed case studies in a wide variety of countries and regions. And simply because of the pandemic, we were curtailed in our ability to do that kind of research that really allows you to dig in to the particular institutional and cultural contexts that help us understand the barriers that are really behind the numbers that we're presenting today. So I just want to conclude by saying, you know, we hope that there's definitely more research to be done. And we know many of you here come from countries, you know, where individual, you know, country level research projects would really complement the kind of global perspective that we've been able to present with these, the predominantly numeric data that we used to produce the report. However, of course, the recommendations that we have are based off of a lot of experience by our colleagues at UNDP and others for years and years of working on this initiative and their experience working in countries with many of you that I think are attending today.